Thank you, Rajalakshmi. I'm not switching on my video because of poor coverage. So, we have been talking about pain management for the last 3 4 sessions. But now we'll move on to another important topic, which is not usually covered in our medical schools. We know that communication is one of the important aspects in patient care, and it has many advantages. I'm not going to talk about that. Bijo will be giving you a detailed lecture on that. Um, but uh, we have to understand that communication is not only important in patient care, but also in our uh, daily life. Even talking to our colleagues, communication is important. Uh, so today's session will be handled by Dr. Biju Raghavan, who is the consultant in pain and palliative medicine at Rajagiri Hospital, Alua. He has done his 2-year postgraduate diploma in pain and palliative medicine in 2004-5, and he has been working in palliative care since then. And he has a special interest in communication workshops. So Biju is one of my best friends, and we have been working together since 2004. Uh, so, Biju, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. Uh, thank you for the kind introduction. And yes, we have been together since 2004, and we have stuck together since then. Uh, and also, uh, it's a pleasure to be associated with Palim India, and people are doing a great job over there. And welcome to all the candidates who are joining in from various parts of the country. And without much ado, let us straight away get into it because we have a lot to cover and fairly limited time. So, Rajlakshmi, if you could start sharing the screen. All right. So, as Sunil said, I'm Dr. Biju Raghavan. I'm a consultant of pain and palliative medicine at a hospital called Rajagiri. It's a tertiary, it's a quaternary care center. And it is located in the middle part of Kerala. It's a state which is located in the southern part of India. Uh, and today we are going to do part one of communication skills. That means there will be a part two next week. And today we are going to cover a few things, some basic things as part one. So we will be talking about the challenges of communication skills as a healthcare professional. And we will also talk about some of the barriers and some do's and don'ts, and a little bit about how to conduct a clinical interview. This is something like having a session on how to take history. I call it history taking 2.0. We are all good at history taking. We have learned it in our undergraduate medical education, and we continue to do it. Just a little bit of tweaking here and there. That's all. So moving on, next slide. So what are the challenges? Say, if you want to go for a picnic, or you want to go to a hotel or a resort or to the movies, you are already in a positive frame of mind. However, when you are sick, you are not well, you are hurting, or somebody close to your heart is not well, it is at those kind of situations that you would go to a hospital. And that is the situation we as healthcare professionals are dealing with. So, the starting point of our contact with the patient and families starts with a negative because they are not well, they are ill, they are suffering. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to come to us, isn't it? So, That itself is a challenge. We are starting from a point of negativity and negative energy when people are in suffering. And irrespective of how big a building you have, or what all instruments you have, or how long your degree is, ultimately, just like beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, similarly, if the patient's experience and the family's experience with the whole ecosystem, not just you as an individual, but you, the other healthcare workers, and the system, and everything, ambience, everything, if that has been satisfactory or not, that is for the patient and the family to decide. And that also is a challenge. Most of the time, we are, with allocation of resources, able to get few of the infrastructure and other So that's a challenge. We start off with a point of negative energy, and irrespective of what uh, money and resources you put in, ultimately the experience depends on their experience of us. It's not what we have provided them. It is how they feel that they have been cared for, the satisfaction that they have been listened to, the satisfaction that they have been cared for. And here communication skills makes a major contribution, and that is why we need to focus on this aspect of our healthcare services. Next slide, please. Now this is an old study way back in 1986, I think. Yeah, so this came in the Journal of Headache, and what they found was the patient satisfaction is depending on the patient's perception that they had an opportunity to tell their story and discuss their concerns about the headache with the physician during the first visit. So, even without a pill being given, just the fact that they had the opportunity to tell their story and they have been listened to, that itself was the best predictor for resolution of a headache problem. Now, this is, you may say it's a placebo, but what point is, whether it's a placebo or psychological satisfaction, the outcome, ultimately as healthcare providers, we are focusing on outcome. What was our intervention and what was our outcome? And if we are using best practices as far as our medical and interventions are concerned, we also need to focus on this area to be incorporated into our best practices. Studies are there to back it up. This being an example. Next slide. There is also a cost factor to it, because when there are medical errors, people can sue, and there are plenty of medical errors happening. And what they found was a majority of these medical errors were due to poor communication. And that brings us to the next point that is in the next slide, please. That a lot of litigation, a lot of financial stress that we face and our institution may face is again an outcome of poor communication. This study in US, which showed hospitals on an average lose $12.3 billion. That's a huge number. Now, if you are not working in the private sector and you think I am working in the government sector, remember, even if there may not be a financial implication to you personally, if in the Indian context, how people can take the law into their own hands, it has an implication on your health and well-being there also. So it is not just about financial well-being, it is also about physical and mental well-being. that is important, and communication skills definitely has a role to play there. Next slide, please. Another thing is that we are not taught communication skills in a structured manner during our undergrad medical days or post-graduation days or even at subspecialty level. We are thoroughly tested on our knowledge, our skills, and our problem-solving abilities multiple times during multiple examinations, theory, practical, OSCEs, everything. We are thoroughly tested all through our uh, training period. But at least in the Indian context, when have you had one class on communication skills? When has there been a question paper on communication skills? When has there been a practical session on communication skills? So we are well rounded when it comes to our skills, as far as our knowledge and skills, as far as the scientific part of medical uh, uh, education is concerned. But when it comes to the soft skills, we are not taught, neither are we tested. And that is why when we come out of medical college, we are left to fend for ourselves. We are left to figure out for ourselves how to deal with complex situations. And many of us have very bad experiences during our clinical journey. So from our point of view, maybe we may be doing the best that is possible. We sacrifice our personal life, our social life for the sake of our patient and families. But in return, we do not get gratitude. We may get pretty awful things in return. Now, all of those things, not I'm not saying everything, but at least a good percentage of the problems could have been preempted only if our medical colleges were teaching us communication skills as diligently as they were teaching us in inspection, palpation, and percussion, because that is as basic as inspection, palpation, and percussion and history taking. Next slide, please. Good communication skills has multiple ramifications in the doctor-patient relationship, starting from better diagnosis because of better history taking. We don't miss out on many things if we are very diligent in our history taking. And if we are able to convince the patient why he or she needs to comply with whatever you are suggesting, and if you are good at it, you will find that the compliance is bound to be better. And if your management is complied with, naturally you will find that the outcomes are going to be good. And if the outcome is good, your patient and family will be happy. And if the patient and family is happy, you are happy and your team is happy. And it also has an impact on the patient's safety. And the other thing, that if something goes wrong, you are at a high risk of being sued, or as happens in many parts of our country, no suing. They just take the law into their hand, and you can sometimes have very negative consequences of that. So all of the peace of mind is very important. So good communication has multiple ramifications. Next slide, please. So this question of why should we focus on medical communication, I guess the it must be fairly clear to you by now. But however, let us go in slide by slide. Next slide, please. First and foremost, you should learn communication skills for your own selfish interest. Good communication skills will save you time, energy, and effort. This is contrary to what most people think about communication skills. People think that you have to spend more time. I'm saying you will save time. If you are doing it right, if you are a skilled communicator, you will save time, effort, and energy. And as a result, you will also have better compliance and good relationship, less stress. Uh, you don't have to undergo a CBG at a young age. And of course, you will have more patience and more respect from your colleagues. It's a win-win-win for you. And that is why you learn communication skills not for others, but for your own selfish interest. Next slide, please. Of course, it helps the patient and families too. It gives them a sense of direction. It takes away a lot of uncertainty. It gives them a lot of clarity. And as a result, they may be able to plan better. Keeping in mind there is a lot of uncertainty in the practice of medicine. Sometimes we ourselves don't know what the patient is having. We are desperately searching for a diagnosis. Even if we find a diagnosis, we can't be sure how things will turn out. We're just hoping and praying things will get better, but we know things may not. But this, what we know, if that is transparently conveyed to the patient and family, or at least to the family in our context, that we are searching for the reason, we still don't know. We are trying to find it. Or we know this is the problem and we are trying to do this for you. We hope for the best, but we really can't be sure. It may go bad also. And not just saying it once, but repeating the messages multiple times very frequently so that the message reaches home and stays there. That is very important. Next slide, please. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the abilities of modern medicine. Because many people think that if you have enough money and you take to the patient to the biggest hospital with the latest gadgets and gizmos, everything can be sorted out. We as healthcare professionals know that it is not true. There is a limit to what we can diagnose, and there is definitely a limit to what we can cure. That is why the Hippocratic dictum says cure sometimes, relieve often, comfort always, because there are very little things we can cure. We can't cure diabetes, we can't cure hypertension, we can't cure dementia, or at least Alzheimer's variety. We can't cure motor neuron diseases, we can't cure COPD, interstitial lung diseases, congestive cardiac failures, CLD, CKD, Crohn's disease, etc., etc. The list is endless, but we can try to control it. If we can't cure it, we can try to control it. That's why nowadays somebody has got diabetes, they live very productive life for 30, 40 years, but ultimately they die of complications of diabetes. So that is the achievement of modern medicine, that even though what we can cure is fairly limited, but we can care, we can provide reasonable control of the diseases much better than how it was previously. However, what modern medicine doesn't teach us or has forgotten to teach us is how to provide comfort, physical comfort, peace of mind. And communication skills has a major role to play in that work, because it will reduce the gap between uh, people's unrealistic expectations from us, and we can, with good communication skills, bring it down to realistic level. And from the realistic level, there is plenty to be done, but we can't ever provide for the unrealistic expectation. We are only going to get stress and pushback and violence and court cases and all. So it's very important that we engage with the community, and for that we need to learn good communication skills. Next slide, please. So let us look at a couple of barriers to communication. A lot of barriers I have put it as environmental. Essentially, what I meant was meant as miscellaneous. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And there are a couple of bullet points. Can we go? Yeah. The lack of time is something that many of my colleagues, when I talk about communication skills, they say we don't have time for this. And as I said earlier, a good communicator, the whole purpose of learning communication skills is to save on time, energy, and effort. So if we are not saving on time, energy, and effort, obviously our communication skills is not up to mark. Lack of privacy. If we are in a busy OP, especially in the government clinic, you may be 2 or 3 doctors sharing a table, and there may be about 40, 50 patients in the room. This was the pre-COVID thing. Nowadays, probably I don't have experience of the government setup in the COVID era, but before, yes, during house surgency, at least I was working in a government hospital. So I know how jam-packed it can be. So, you don't need to have actual privacy. You can learn to create an illusion of privacy, and that is good enough for good communication. So on and so forth. Mobile phone is a big distraction these days, but you can't turn it off. You never know when an emergency call comes in. So we need to learn telephone etiquettes for better communication. And nowadays, especially since the pandemic, we are relying more and more on technology, and we are getting good at it. Right now, we are using technology for this session itself. However, please remember, not everybody may have access to technology, and those people may be the most vulnerable among us. And even among those who have access to technology, not everybody may be tech savvy. So those things can be a barrier. Next slide, please. Sometimes the patient or the family member can be a barrier. Sometimes the family member is overprotective and does not allow the patient to speak. Anything you ask, instead of the patient, they answer for the patient. So sometimes we may not hear the patient's version. Sometimes the patient and the family may be coming from a disadvantaged background socioeconomically, and they may feel very intimidated in your presence, and they may be not be able to convey everything that they wanted to. So it is your job to make them feel comfortable so that they feel encouraged and empowered enough to convey whatever they wanted to. Some people may think that as a doctor, you are not interested in their social, economic, financial issues, and they may say that how can I tell my non-medical problems to them? So again, I said it's up to you. I mean, it is the onus is on you to make them feel comfortable enough to talk about all aspects of their life. Some diseases can be challenging, especially related to loss of speech or loss of hearing, but we have to get over it somehow. Next slide, please. Sometimes we as professionals can be a barrier pretty often, and one of the, especially these days, is how we appear to the patients with all our masks and PPE kits. Next slide, please. So our appearance can be very intimidating with all the steps and uniform and all of that. On top of that, our facial expression. Sometimes we may have a very stern expression, even if the mask covers our major part of the face. A lot of expression is conveyed through the eyes. So uh, this can be a barrier. So remember, we have to improve our body language so that people feel less intimidated. There is a fine line between inspiring confidence and inspiring fear. Often people are fearful of doctors, and it's very important to be inspire confidence among them and not inspire fear. Next slide. There's a couple of bullets. I think this will be one more. No. Okay, can you go back, please? Okay. We need to change our attitude over a time, over a long period of time. We have been the high and mighty doctor and my way or the highway, and definitely there was no scope for communication. There was only command given by you and command taken by the patient and family. Either they accept the command or you tell, okay, then you go wherever you want. Those days are gone. We have to work in a more participatory manner. And as a result, communication skills is very important. We need to change our attitude. Next slide, please. And this I already conveyed. This we are handicapped as healthcare professionals because our education did not include communication skills. And as a result, we have been suffering. The distance that we are facing between the general community and the medical community, the gap of mistrust and ill feeling, and as a result, violence, and in many countries, ever increasing suing, and as a result, ever increasing premium on the medical liability that what you call that thing that you have to take insurance. All of these things is indicative that there is a growing gap between us and them. This growing gap has to be reduced and the onus is on us as healthcare professionals, because it is our need, it is our selfish interest that we have to reduce this gap, because we want to have peace of mind, we want to have some comforts in life, and there's only so much stress we can take. It's very important that we work towards reducing this gap, and for that we need to be trained. Unfortunately, there are very few centers in India which are training young medical MBBS graduates in training in communication skills. I was fortunate that uh, me and Sunil, we got trained by a team from UK, a nurse and a social worker who were now full-time trainers in communication skills. So in our first year, they came and did a 2-day workshop on communication skills, and the next year they came and did a training the trainers workshop. So we just blessed and lucky that we had a structured training, and then we could develop it on for it to be relevant in the Indian context. So not everybody gets chances like that, and so it is very important that our medical education, ICMI, or what you call the Medical Council of India, should seriously consider. They have started something in that direction. I think Sunil knows more about it. However, it is important that a more structured training program and a more robust training program is incorporated in our MBBS medical curriculum. Next slide, please. I'm sorry for the overhead announcement. This is something that happens every hour in the hospital. So this must be causing some disturbance in there. Okay, thank God it's over. Can we have the next slide, please? Coming to some do's and don'ts. Next slide, please. Most important part is to make make a habit of making eye contact, because eye contact is what starts the relationship and starts the communication. When you don't make eye contact, it hinders good communication. And when you make eye contact, it does not mean staring into the eye. Focus on the face. Don't look away from the face. And while you're communicating, don't engage in other activities. Focus on the communication part. So make eye contact and continue to make eye contact. And smile. Remember, even if you are wearing a mask, the smile will be seen in your eyes, and the smile will be heard in your voice. I repeat, the smile will be seen in your eyes, and the smile will be heard in your voice. Instead of a smile, you have a grumpy face, it will be seen in your eyes, and the grumpiness will be heard in your voice. So don't be grumpy, have a smile, and it is a self-generating positive energy machine. You smile, even without reason you smile, you will feel good. And you will definitely make the person in front of you feel good too. Next slide. Do not categorize or label people, irrespective of who they are, what is their education, what is their profession, or what they look like, or what their beliefs are. Doesn't matter. Each one of them needs to be respected as individuals. Do not put a label on them. Though that is a very that's a very grumpy person, that's a very itchy person. Don't put labels like that. We are nobody, not one of us is perfect. And within 24 hours, sometimes we are happy and very nice, and in another 1 hour we are angry and really screaming at somebody, and the third we are really envious, and we our mood changes and our personality changes within 24 hours multiple times. So how can you expect the patient and family to be nice and reasonable all the time? On top of that, they are sick, they are not well, they are suffering. That's why they are here in front of you. So please be non-judgment, accept people as they are, and respect people as for who they are. Next slide, please. Do not ask leading question. Did you understand that? Do not ask leading question. So when you put in a tone which is kind of leading, Your pain is better, isn't it? So then it becomes very difficult for the person to deny or to go against what you're leading, especially if it is somebody from a disadvantaged background. They may find it very difficult to say no to you, the high and mighty doctor, when you're saying you're better, isn't it? Even if they are not better, they may be forced to say yes, when in reality they may not be. So don't put people in that kind of a predicament. Just simply ask, how are you? And they will tell you the truth. Keep an ask an open-ended question. Do not ask leading questions. Next slide, please. For you, a veteran of medical profession, you may have seen countless miseries. You may have seen major tragedies. So the person who has come to you hobbling because there was a small, what do you call, pinprick on the leg, you may think that is such a small thing. However, for that person, his or her pain and associated difficulties are the biggest problem in the world. Doesn't matter what you have seen in your life. For that person, that problem is the biggest problem. And we are not here to discuss about your life experiences and what you have seen and what you have experienced. We are here for that person who has come to you with a pinprick on the leg and in pain and hobbling, right? So please do not minimize anybody's problem. Definitely do not compare your patient's problem with anybody else's problem, just to make the person feel that their problem is nothing. Because for each person, their problem is the biggest problem. And when you convey that according to you, their problem is not much a big deal, you are disappointing them. However, what is important is to minimize or normalize and to acknowledge their emotional experience of the event, telling them that how they feel is perfectly okay. How they feel about this is okay. I hope you understood the problem. I hope you understood what I'm trying to convey. Do not minimize their problem, normalize their experience or their emotional experience of the problem. Do not minimize their problem, normalize their experience of the problem. Next slide, please. Do not give false hopes. That means do not lie. That means if you can't tell the truth, at least do not lie. There is a lot of gray in between. Explore how you can use that. Do not give false hopes. And what I talked about earlier, bring expectations to realistic levels, and then a lot can be done. That means we always have we always have some realistic hope to be given. Now, before coming to palliative medicine, I did not know that. But after getting trained in palliative medicine, I realized that what other professionals considered as a hopeless situation, the palliative medicine professional starts from there. There is plenty to be done, even if it is the most hopeless of situations. And that is the empowerment you will get when you get trained in palliative medicine. You never have to say to anybody, there is nothing more to be done. You will never have to abandon any of your patients. There is always something to be done. You learn all of this. So do not give false hopes. Always give realistic hope and empower yourself to give realistic hope. Get trained in palliative. Next slide, please. Do not assume. Many times people will come and tell problems, and we end up assuming that that is the problem. It may not be. If somebody says, I'm so scared, and then we can tell them, oh, don't worry, I am there for you. Don't worry, everything will be all right. We are giving you good treatment, everything. But what if the person was talking about his daughter's marriage? Most likely will not happen, will be broken up because now they can't arrange whatever is required for the marriage, and the groom side is now they are trying to call off the marriage. So if that is what prompted this person to say, I'm so scared, I'm so worried. And then you have totally gone off target by saying, don't worry, I'm there, we'll take care of you. So it is not going to be, it's just a lot of empty, nice words with really no impact. So it's very important to ask. Ask and they will tell you. Do not assume. The moment you hear somebody in distress saying, I'm so scared, I'm so worried, I don't know what to do, I just wish I were dead, or any of these kind of statements, ask them why. Do not assume for yourself. Ask them why, and then they will tell you why they said what they said. And once you know what they said, why they said what they said, then you will realize that most of the time you really do not have a solution. Sometimes, in case you have a solution, please go ahead and provide it. However, as I said, many a times, most of the times, we may not have a solution, but it is important to listen, because when you listen, you are facilitating ventilation of stress, ventilation of psychological stress. You are doing a therapeutic healing procedure. Ventilation is a procedure. And by being there and facilitating, by listening to them and them speaking out their troubles, pouring out their heart to you, you are providing a lot of psychological relief. As a palliative care doctor, you may not get paid for it, but a lot of psychologists make good money out of doing the same thing. So it is a psychological procedure, facilitation of ventilation of emotions, emotional stress. It has a healing ability, a lot of psychological relief is obtained. So don't think that just listening and that telling them and allowing them to talk about the problems without you giving any solutions is a waste of time. No, it is a very, very important psychological intervention you are doing. Next slide, please. And last but not the least, do not forget the human touch. I know in the early part of this corona pandemic in month of March 2020, we were so scared. We would go for home care with all our, newfangled face shield and N95, and we used to go on scrubs and then put on gowns and masks, what do you call this, shoe covers and everything. And we would dress up completely like this and still be scared of touching the patient. Over a period of time, this created a lot of distress in me, because that is not how we trained. We were trained to be human with our patients, and being human also means a human touch. And subsequently, over a period of time, me and my team got over our fear, and then we, with due protection, with all of these things, we restarted touching our patients. Why I am telling you my experience, uh, because of this pandemic, many of us are scared to touch our patient, and there is no shame to say that. I am not ashamed to say that I was scared and I had stopped touching. But what I'm trying to say is that it is okay to be scared. Protect yourself properly to the best of your ability, to whatever you have, but get back to being human and employing the human touch. There is no better power or more powerful therapeutic tool than a human touch. And along with it, I would emphasize, take good care of yourself. We are all living in extraordinarily stressful times. So, taking good care of yourself means moving your body, do some kind of exercise every day. Move your mind. That means exercise your mind by doing meditation. Obviously, that means not sitting somewhere and sleeping. That means meditation is a very, very active mind exercise. Indulge in some hobbies, just doing your professional work and going back home and then doing some household chores. Life is more than that. Indulge in some hobbies, enjoy nature, do something. If you're a gadget geek or a freak, do something with the gadgets, whatever. Do something beyond your work or housework, and stay connected with friends, families, others who matter, stay connected to social media or phone or whatever. Of course, keep social distancing. And also, it's a good time to introspect, ask the deeper questions: Who am I? What am I doing here? Etc. Etc. Stay connected to the divine if you want, but stay connected. Next slide, please. So that we're almost coming to the end of the presentation. History taking 2.0. It is essentially basic how we used to take history taking, but I'm not going to go into complaints, presenting complaints, past history of complaints, family history of complaints. I'm not going to do that because we already know that. I'm just saying what you can add on to. First and foremost, greet the person. Now, most of these things you would know, but are you practicing it? If you're practicing it, great. If not, restart. Greeting has five components: make eye contact, smile, and maybe nod your head, and then say something nice like hello, good morning, whatever is your locally relevant. Say something, and then get comfortable. That means both you and them. It is onus is on you that you should be comfortable and they should be comfortable. So if they have come to the OPD, provide them a place to sit, give them a chair, stool, whatever, make them comfortable. If you have gone to the IP, do not stand by the bedside. Sit by the bedside. Sitting will not only make you feel comfortable, it will also enhance the satisfaction of the patient. Don't spend more time. Whatever time you spend in your IP rounds, it can be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or whatever. Whatever that time, instead of standing, sit and have that time. You can sit and examine. You can sit and take a break. You can sit and do auscultation. Everything that most of the things that you can do standing, you can do sitting. So it will not only be comfortable for you, but more importantly, it has a better impact on the satisfaction, the patient satisfaction, and the family satisfaction. And start the interview with an open-ended question. We had a one slide upon how to, the importance of open-ended questions. So any interview, start with an open question, and then when they start speaking, listen. There are plenty of research which has gone into saying that doctors usually interrupt their patients within the first 10 seconds of them starting to speak. Next slide. And not only it's not important to listen, but it's also important to encourage patients to talk. And how do you encourage patients to talk? Eye contact. Look in them in the face. Nod your head from time to time, and also make some encouraging sounds from your end. Sounds like okay, and then so these kind of sounds or words or questions encourage them to talk. And while they're talking, clarify as you go along. And sometimes you may have to gently nudge them into the direction. Otherwise, sometimes if they're going totally off tangent, it will help if you just help them bring back to uh, the main issue. And after all of that is concerned and you have gone through the investigation or even otherwise, it is important to find their insight. The insight means what does the patient understand about what is happening to him or her? So asking them, so what did the doctors tell you, or what are the reports telling you? So all of that thing is important. So this will give you more information. This will either tell you that the patient knows everything about what he or she has. It will tell you that the patient does not know anything about what he or she has, or it will tell you the patient knows a little bit about what he or she has, and a lot of things are self-created, self-imagined things, which is not true to the actual real situation. So you will get a lot of information when you ask people their insight. And also, apart from insight, also ask what are they worried about, what are their main concerns, and they will tell you what their main concerns are. And it could be related to, am I going to get better, or am I going to die, or will I be, especially when it comes to serious health related suffering, patients have very reasonable questions. Am I going long enough to see my granddaughter getting wed? So you will then have a list of concerns that the patient has. And obviously, when you have that list, that means you have to address it at one point of time, if not immediately, at some point of time in the near future. Next slide, please. And once all this, you have gathered all this information and there is a clarity in your mind as to what the patient has and what is possible, what is not possible, what are the possible options in front of you, share this information with the patient and family honestly. Sometimes it happens that the family does not want you to be honest with the patient, and that is called collusion. We will talk about it during the next session. And if that is the case, if you can't be honest with the patient, at least don't lie to them. As I said, there is a gray area you can explore. You can say something like, I need more information before I can talk to you about it. That would be one way of exploring the gray area between the truth and absolute lie. And if you are able to have an honest discussion, then of course you will have to discuss treatment options. And nowadays we talk about decision by consensus. Earlier, we used to have a decision by consensus among medical professionals. We used to have a medical board, or otherwise, we used to have cross consultation. We used to ask opinion from our colleagues, and we used to take that opinion, and that would be a decision. And what we do with that is a decision by consensus. However, nowadays we are also talking about not only a medical decision, but also discussing the medical options with the patient and family so that they are also part of the decision making process. After all, it is to them that we are providing the service, and we need to know what they think about it, what are their opinion about it. And it is possible that your best option may not be practical from the patient's point of view. Either they may not have enough money for it, or they may have some other uh, reasons for not accepting the best option that you have given. It could be either a logistical problem or related to their beliefs. It could be anything. So it is very important that to have the discussion. And if what is the best option you have suggested is for some reason not going to happen, then you have to give the next best possible option. And what is the next best possible option? If that is acceptable to them, then that becomes the most practical medical management. And the practical medical management is the responsibility of all concerned because you all together decided to get on with it. So that is the decision by consensus. And we have a benefit out of taking decision by consensus, but that means we are alone, not responsible for a negative outcome out of it. This was a decision by consensus. Obviously, you will have to document it too. And as I said earlier, also we have to listen to their beliefs because for each person, their belief is important. From our point of view, that may be a very stupid belief, but for them, it is a very, very relevant belief. And never mock anybody's beliefs, fears, or problems or constraints. And once we factor all of this in and we're taking a decision by consensus, just summarize the whole thing in a minute or in a sentence or a half a para. And then we have to close the interview. Next slide, please. So once we have decided everything, we close the interview. And before you close interview, after all the discussion, just ask this: is there anything else you want to know? Is there anything else you want to talk about? This is like providing the sweet dessert at the end of the meal. Because the moment you say this, you will see a smile come onto the face of the people. And that is the positive energy that you want to provide them when they are leaving your door. When they leave the door, they should be walking out with a smile. After all the discussion, when you say, is there anything else you want to talk about? Is there anything else you want to know? They will just smile and then say no. Mostly 99% of the times, this is what happens. But be prepared for that 1% where they may still have a couple more of questions. That means they still have a lot of concerns that have not been addressed during the main interview. So if even that is taken care of at the end, then you last always ask, is there anything else that you want to talk about? Is there anything else that you want to know? and then the smile will be there when they leave the door. And when they leave the door is not closed. We leave the door behind. What that means is that till the next planned visit, till that time, our doors are not shut to them. We give them a number through which we can be contacted. That means our doors are always open for them. Now, mind you, if you do not want your personal mobile number to be given to public, do not give it to public, because your personal life, your private time is entirely your prerogative. But give them some number, maybe a department number or a contact number of the on-call in charge, somebody, so that they have somebody to call up in case they have some difficulty in between the next visit. And you end with a greeting. Again, 3 points: make eye contact, smile, which is constant for both the greetings, and this time culturally appropriate: goodbye, bye bye, namaskara, namaste, etc. Next slide, please. So what I want to emphasize is medical communication skills. Medical communication is not a talent. If you want to sing on stage or write poetry, God has to be kind on you. You should be given a superior creative brain. But most of us have only an average brain. That is why we became doctors. However, some among us are very creative also. So for average brain, we all can learn skill. That means learning, practicing, and we become very good. That's why it's called medical communication skills. It is not medical communication talent. Doesn't matter whether you're extrovert or introvert. Doesn't matter whether you have command of 10 languages or you just know one language. Nothing matters. Each one of us can be good communicators, because after all, it's a skill. Each one of us can learn it, practice it, get better at it. It's a never-ending process of getting better at it. So I guess we'll stop there. Next slide. Next week, part two, we will talk about communicating bad news, how to manage pollution, and how to deal with an angry person. I think I'll stop here. Sunil, over to you.
Thank you, Vidya. So we have some time to ask your doubts and your comments also.
So, I did not know that hospitals have a department, so to speak, for communication and to talk to patients as is. Would you tell us your typical day? What happens in your typical day?
Hello, madam. I I I do not have a department of communication skills. I am running a department of pain and palliative medicine, and communication skills is inherently part of uh, our palliative care services that we render. When we get trained in palliative medicine, communication skills is a very important part of the curriculum, and that is why this program that Pallium India is doing has emphasized on having at least 2 sessions on communication skills. This should be part of every medical education. And if at all you're interested to know how my day is spent, well, half a day, the morning session I spend in the community, because I run a community-based palliative home care program. It's a charitable program funded by our hospital. Our hospital is a private quaternary hospital. It is run by the CMI Fathers. It's a Christian organization. So as part of the Christian values, they want to have a community outreach program. They want to serve the poor, and just because somebody does have money should not be a reason for them uh, being denied palliative care. So that at least the suffering is taken care of. So morning session is spent like that. Afternoon, then I spend my time in the hospital. My team continues home care. Then afternoon, I spend my time here. I'm the only doctor in the department. And in the hospital, I have my OP time from 2 p.m. to 4:30. and depending on need, it can be extended also. Then I go and see cross consultations in IP. About 20 odd departments take the services of pain relief and palliative care and end of life care. I am presently not admitting patients under me, but I am providing all these services, pain services for post-op pain management and other miscellaneous pains, chronic pains, burns pain, cancer pain, etc. to various departments. That is, pain relief is the service which a lot of departments are taking. Then palliative care, essentially oncological palliative care, a little bit of respiratory palliative care, and end of life care is predominantly from oncology as well as from critical care. And I because I'm a single doctor, I provide them all services, and I'm available over the phone for the ward nurses and the concerned doctors to call me if they have anything to discuss or take advice from. I hope that kind of answers your curiosity, and communication skills is inbuilt in all of that, including pain management.
Thank you, sir.
Most welcome.
Anybody else? No doubt or comment?
Thank you, Dr. Biju. It was a very nice presentation. We are looking forward to the second session. I think that is a tougher part of communication. Not only in the palliative sector, in the other sector also, medical field, we come across angry patients and controlling our temper too. So we're looking forward to our next session.
Thank you for your nice words. Yes, as we go on to more complex situations, the challenge naturally increases. So yeah, it is there. And having an online training program on communication skills is a very poor choice compared to what we can achieve during a proper training workshop. This COVID pandemic has curtailed our ability to conduct proper workshop. I mean, Pallium India, when they were doing this kind of courses before this online courses, I was a regular visitor. We used to do a full day workshop, and that a little bit of hands-on experience. We used to do role plays, and to get to feel what it feels like being in the hot seat, and how easy it is to say a theory and how difficult it is to actually sit, even in a role play, to sit as a doctor and talk to a patient about very difficult conversations. So unfortunately, we are having a compromise, but at least something is better than nothing. And hopefully, maybe Pallium India, after all these things kind of settles down, hopefully Pallium India may call all the participants of the online training program for a real hands-on workshop. So maybe, I mean, I don't know. I leave it to Pallium India organizers.
We hope so. We hope so. We're looking forward to it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you, sir, for that very interesting session and such a glaring gap in our medical education, actually. We are so professionally caught up that we don't even know the basics of relating to our patients. And I'm so glad that I could attend this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Okay.
Am I
Uh,
audible? So how do you
yeah.
overcome the difficulty when there are many colleagues alongside and you want to communicate meaningfully with the patient? I'm Dr. Melita. I'm asking you. So how do you handle such a situation?
I would like some clarity. Are you talking about colleagues who are equally trained as you are in communication skills, or you're talking about colleagues who are agnostic to communication skills?
Yes, sir. They are unable to communicate meaningfully with the patient, and it leaves a very unhealthy atmosphere. I'm an anesthetist, and I work in a government setup.
Right. So I don't envy being in your shoes, Dr. Melita, especially when you're in a government sector. The atmosphere is also a little different. Uh, all I can say is it's a fine balancing act which we learn along the way. It is just like how you know a certain knowledge which others don't have, and as a result, they can't see the merit of it. But somehow, over a period of time, you figure out how to share this knowledge with your colleagues. And some of them may take it, some of them may not take it. That is their choice. Also, a very good way of influencing them is how you practice and demonstrate it clinically. All our clinical skills we have learned when our gurus demonstrated to us how to do it. We learned palpation, percussion, auscultation, etc. by watching and learning. Similarly, communication skills is a skill. It's a clinical skill. And when you do it, they see it, and then hopefully many of them will pick it up. At least there is a lot of thing you can influence to the younger generation, people who are working on the youth and those who come in contact. Many of us, or many among us, who have not been exposed and they have been in very high positions of power and responsibility, they may find it very difficult to learn it. But the fresh minds are will be more amenable. So maybe your influence on the older generation may be less, but as the generations come down, the future may be better. There's a whole area, the separate areas we can think of how you can deal with. And last thing, there is no shame in trying and failing. The shame is only in not trying.
Thank you, sir.
I hope that kind of uh, you know answers your question. May not be satisfactorily, but something.
No, it's something to work on and never give up.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Just for you, for if it's a solace, I do this training programs gratis. I don't charge. It is up to the organizers if they want to give a small honorarium, or before COVID time they used to provide that travel and accommodation. So I have never charged for any of the training programs I do. I know there are other professionals who teach communication skills that charge in huge sums. I never took one single paisa, and I wanted to do and organizations at Pallium India regularly call me for this kind of, and I'm only happy to do it. But just for your information, I tried to do this in a very high-end hospital, another quaternary hospital I was working in. It was an in-house program, and the chairman told that everybody has to come, and they told that at least the junior doctors, their salary will, one day salary will be cut if they do not attend the program, because the chairman was very convinced that's very, very important. And we had more than 150 doctors in that hospital. And guess how many people turned up on that day? 2. And we had to cancel the program. So that is the kind of attitude we are dealing with. But never give up if you are able to enlighten, or you're able to change or make one person see the benefit of it. And as I said always, it is for your own selfish interest. I learned and practiced communication skills for my own selfish interest. There is a selfish interest in it. And once people see that, understand it, then they learn and practice. If you're able to convert one person, it is kind of a missionary zeal that we have to bring in to make the lives of our colleagues better.
Thank you, sir. That was very encouraging.
Yeah.
So,
Am I
Dr.
audible?
Harsha, where are you working? Dr. Harsha?
Dr. Harsha, you are muted. Hello, sir. Hello.
Where are you working?
Malabar Cancer Care Society, Kannur.
Okay, I see a bus in your profile, and I read it as
Actually,
telemedicine unit.
yeah, we're having a telemedicine unit, sir.
Okay,
Are you
that's why,
working with Dr. Biji?
No,
No,
it's cancer care.
it's Cancer Care Society. Dr. Ravindran, Dr. V.C. Ravindran, with Dr. V.C. Ravindran.
Oh, right. Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, somebody was asking something. I think this will be the last question.
So I'm Dr.
Angela.
Angela.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, doctor, you are.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to ask, which sir, like we have been talking about the glaring gap in medical education because regarding communication. Now, they have brought about a policy to teach communication skills. It's called as the 8COM module. The problem with this policy is that the teachers have not been trained enough to teach communication. We have modules like foundations of communication, barriers of communication, many of which you have addressed today. So what I wanted to know was, are there any sessions for communication which teachers like us could attend so that we are better trained to implement this module in the medical education?
Oh, thank you for bringing this up, Dr. Angela. It is a very, very pertinent question. And I think many of my colleagues who are, in this field, especially for communication skills training program, we are very worried that this 8COM program is there, but where are the teachers? So you have brought in a very, very pertinent thing. One thing that just came into my mind was, perhaps if you have an influence on people who are policymakers of 8COM, or if you can convey a message, maybe we can do something together. For example, Palem India Tips Echo is an excellent platform for online training program. Palem India is also a very, very proficient organization. It's a WHO recognized training center
Biju,
for. Hello.
Biju, actually, Palim India have initiated some making modules on 8COM, and we are planning to train the teachers from various medical colleges, and there are many teachers who, or many colleges who have already expressed their interest. So we are working towards that. Actually, it has been halted because of this COVID situation, and probably will change into a online program.
That is excellent. I am sorry I didn't know about that. And if as soon as this can be rolled out, I'll be happy. If Palem India asks me, I'll be happy to be part of this program. And we have to focus on teachers. We need to have proper training program for the teachers, and we also need to teach them. We have to train the trainers modules also. We have to teach them how, give them a kind of a grid of how to prepare so that they can teach. So because I personally understand the importance of it, because when we were doing our post-graduation 1 year, these experts from UK came and taught us. They gave us they did a workshop, and the next year they came back and they did a training the trainers pro workshop. So it is not only important to know this; it is important how to get trained in how to impart education. So I hope all of that will happen.
Rajlakshmi, I think please get connected Dr. Angela with Liji.
Sure, sir.
Okay.
Never knew
So
how time flew. We have to
can
get that case discussion.
move on to the patient story.
Thanks. Bye.
Rajlakshmi. So today's patient story, please share it. So Dr. Swati, who is the professor and HOD of dental surgery, will be presenting. So Dr. Swati, it's over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. I am Swati Sathe. I am an oral and maxillofacial surgeon, currently professor and head at Banas Medical College, Palanpur, Gujarat. Next slide, please. Today, the patient story is about stage 4 carcinoma of right buccal mucosa, female patient aged 43 years. She came to the OPD with a complaint of trismus. There was a non-healing ulcer on the right side of the cheek. There was some bleeding from the oral cavity, pain, and on a non-verbal scale, it was around 3 to 4 out of 5. Difficulty in chewing and yes, constipation. The history of her illness was that she is an operated case of squamous cell carcinoma, right lateral border of the tongue in 2018. That time she was treated by post-surgery radiation therapy also. At the time of the surgery, the right lower molars were extracted. However, the upper molars on the right side were not extracted. She was sent for a pre-RT dental checkup in that same institute. Even then, the upper right molars on that side were not extracted. Post-RT, there was patient, of course, was not coming for a regular checkup, but the trismus started increasing post-RT. And a month back when she presented, there was just some one finger mouth opening, pain, and the upper right molars were all impinging on the mucosa below. Next slide, please. The external examination, mouth opening was less than one finger, 1.5 centimeters. There was some fungating skin over the cheek, hard swelling on the right middle third of the face. There were no obvious palpable neck nodes. Intraoral examination, there was a ulcerar proliferative growth in the right side cheek. It was involving the upper and the lower sulcus, the gingivo-buccal sulcus. And as I said, the upper teeth were impinging on the lower alveolus. Next slide, please. Treatment, a biopsy was asked for. Then a CCT, head and neck along with thorax was done. The routine blood investigations were done. Biopsy was suggested of a squamous cell carcinoma, right buccal mucosa. Disease, according to the CCT scan, was reaching up to the skull base. Because of that, she was deemed as poor prognosis for surgery, and palliative radiotherapy was advised. Psychosocial aspects, she married woman living with her 46-year-old husband, a 10 and 14-year-old child, rented house, manual laborers. Her husband was a manual laborer and she was doing housework in different houses. There were financial worries because in the last 2 years she had not been able to, they had not been able to really work, and there were a lot of medical expenses also, and children's education and what their life would be later on all was a part of her that aspect. Next slide, please. When she came, she was taking tablet diclofenac 50 milligrams twice a day, advised by someone in her village, and then we started her on tablet Ultrasat 2 tablets 6 hourly. She was quite comfortable after that, and right now we are trying to counsel her for palliative care because she is not interested in the palliative radiation therapy. She wants to go back to her village, and they are generally quite angry against the recurrence, resigned to their fate also, because they have realized that, that eating all that tobacco and all has caused this. So they are resigned and accepting their fate. But they are, yes, they are quite distressed about the whole situation. Right now, her main concern is pain. She cannot eat, and she knows she is dying, and she doesn't know what to do about that. So that is the main concern that she has right now. So it's a 43-year-old female with recurrent squamous cell carcinoma along with severe trismus. And this is because of the impinging right upper molars developed recurrence, which was inoperable. Discussion points: importance of pre-RT dental checkup. As of now, to remove the impinging of the upper molars, we are trying to extract those teeth, so at least they don't impinge on the lower mucosa. And pre-RT dental checkup. Actually, the oncosurgeon who operated on the right side tongue, that time when they removed the lower molars, the same time the upper posterior teeth and the upper teeth should have been removed. If that would have been done, this thing wouldn't have recurred. We see so many cases, because of the sharp teeth, the recurrence comes because of that. And after even, okay, fine, if it was, like, I consider this a medical error and poor communication, because the oncosurgeon didn't pass it on to his dental colleagues that we need to extract the upper teeth. And the dental department, I missed it, because that time when the patient goes after post-surgery, the trismus, there is no trismus. The mouth opening is nice, 3.5 fingers. So they never even calculated that the teeth in line of fire should have been removed, or post-RT there would be a trismus, and these teeth could lead to another, it could lead to a recurrence. So that, I think, is a point of discussion. And follow-up, the follow-up, importance of follow-up. The patient was lost to follow-up for nearly 2 years. So if, that session, and if the patient was told that the follow-up should have been regular and all, but I think it was mainly because of the patient's, the recurrence has come only because of the teeth impinging on the mucosa. And what type of palliative care to be advised? From our side right now, we have put her on Ultraset. We have tried to tell her, as she's not interested in any treatment anymore, we have told her that we'll try and keep you comfortable. And with the physician, right now, she is okay with Ultraset. So, WHO ladder, the step 3 of morphine would be started as and when. Realistic hope has been, given to her. And we try to, she is planning to go to her village where they have their family support. The children, that education 8th standard and 10th standard, so if they can complete it, or else try to put them into a Skill India, skill-based program. And for her dying scare and all, whatever, she believes in some local sect over there. So we told her that, you can go for, regular bhajans or do something like that, So now we have taken her phone number, and as after this discussion, whatever other, suggestions are there, we'll try to implement them.
Thank you, madam. If anybody has any comments on this, please come up. Anybody? I think we will ask it to an oncologist. Dr. Anisha, are you here?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Anisha, do you want to make any points?
Actually, this is a very important scenario, because in case of, especially in case of radiation, before radiation, we have to definitely do a thorough dental checkup, because like that, because there is a, in case there is a risk of osteoradionecrosis. That is when the radiation falls to the bone during the, especially in buccal tumors and all, there's chance for radiation spillage to the jaw, so that the necrosis of the jaw because of osteonecrosis. And it is actually the treatment options are very limited, and the quality of life will be very poor. This patient has actually the complications like post, there is a trismus, so that the dental hygiene will be reduced further. And I have a doubt whether they were given sodium fluoride gel, whether it was, I didn't get that point.
Sorry, what gel?
Sodium fluoride gel after application, whether it was given.
For the pain?
No, not for the pain.
Oh, I don't know. After RT, what was given, I don't know. Because
You don't know.
when these type of patients, Dr. Nisha, they come to us, the osteoradionecrosis would happen after, if we do the extraction after the RT. But here,
Actually,
when the patients come with trismus, it is difficult, you know, it's a one finger opening. We are not able to do anything. So right now, we are planning to do the extractions. I'm sure we're not going to be able to do it completely. But even if we break off half of the teeth, the impingement will become lesser. And then she might be more comfortable. So
actually, osteoradionecrosis can occur. It is not related to the extraction of teeth, because it is high chance with the caries tooth if it is present, because we can't extract after RT, because it will not heal. That area will not heal because of the fibrosis. The vessels will not be there.
Right.
That's the issue. So actually, sodium fluoride gel, I am not sure whether in RCC and all, they actually they are provided by the dental department. That's why I'm asked.
Okay. No. Sodium fluoride, I don't think so. That was given. And caries, dental caries and all was checked in that pre-RT checkup. They checked dental caries and all. So basically the protocol generally for regular dental OPDs is to remove the carious teeth.
Yeah.
Here my point is that they should have, you know, thought of 2 years on and, you know, thought of the trismus taking place. So between the oncosurgeon and the dental surgeon, the teeth should have got extracted. And I have seen too many patients like this. So wherever, I mean, I generally try to set up a protocol, you know, by explaining that these things have to be done. And sodium fluoride, it generally is given. So, you know, it's a caries resistant, so that dental caries doesn't happen.
Yeah, prophylactically.
Prophylactic dental caries. But the dental caries after 18 and 20, it's not that that common. So if it's radiation caries, to avoid the radiation caries, we have to give sodium fluoride. I don't know whether the institute had given it or not. I don't know, because the patient presented right now with this situation to right now where I'm working, and they came from this village, and so that's how it is.
Because mainly it can happen because due to the sometimes we in olden the times the RT technique is also not that effective, especially in small areas. They will have a 2D different techniques as radiation planning, so that there will be increased spillover to the jaws, because the soft tissues or the surrounding normal structures will give increased doses. So that's the main cause of this trismus. If we give, in higher centers, usually we give a very higher techniques like IMRT and all, so that we can soft tissue sparing, so that the other side effects like xerostomia. Xerostomia also will.
Xerostomia is also, yes, correct.
Yeah.
So
it
that
also,
is she had very, you know, thick saliva and all. So for that we advised her, you know, that, you know, more water, lemon water and all, and soft liquid diets and all, and the fungal mass which she had. So we started with the dressings. We are trying to, you know, primary health center in our village. We are trying to contact them and tell them that, you know, do this much for them, the doctor.
Then another thing, usually what we advise that is we can, which is financially very much easy for the patient, is we can add in a glass of water, add a pinch of salt and sodium bicarb. it is a very potent saliva stimulator, and it is very affordable also, so that we can advise them to wash the face, wash the mouth frequently to about 12 times a day.
Yes.
It's very good. It is very good, actually.
True,
It
true,
prevents infection also.
True, true. And I have started telling them to drink, lemon water also, so that xerostomia and all, a little bit of salivary glands will get stimulated.
Yeah, yes.
And put her on B complex and iron. But then now the morphine thing is, right now she's okay, but then we'll have to step in and give her,
if we can advise regarding further, since the trismus is 1.5, it is very difficult to maintain the oral hygiene, of course. So we should have, if these things were like what ma'am told, like extraction of tooth, then the prophylactic sodium fluoride gel application, if we had given a high RT technique, and all these things would have happened, it should have been, it would not have happened.
Could have been avoided, exactly. My thing was that this situation could have been avoided if, some little extra thought would have been given, that what, after 2 years, what could happen to the patient, so
if there is even if we do all this, if the patient goes in for a radio necrosis, that is like dental caries, and we can't extract the tooth, what we advise is we give them prophylactic, we give them antibiotics 5 times every monthly. The patient has to take a course of antibiotic, because surgery is not an option, because it will be a sequestrum formation. It will be a non-healing ulcer. So we can do this. That's what we are doing. I think over the experiences, a patient can be symptom-free to a certain time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because for osteoradionecrosis, the more you remove, the more it's going to get generated. So we
actually,
don't do that.
lots of treatment are advised in theories like hyperbaric oxygen, like surgery, but it is not actually showing
practical.
Not practical also. That's right.
So
then
thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Anybody else has any more thing to add?
Sir, I just wanted to ask something to ma'am, Swati ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, actually, I just wanted to know whether they had mentioned anything about the previous treatment experience to you.
Previous treatment experience.
You told no introduction.
Well, when they got operated and all, they were fine. No? The mouth opening was good. The pre-RT, they are not registering this thing that this could be avoided. And Dr. Harsha, they come from village and uneducated, and they're not very communicative. So as I said, they're just resigned. Just help us out with the pain. And for the constipation, we gave them some dietary advices. Started the patient on Crimafin. So they as such are not complaining about anything.
Yeah, because they don't know about it.
They don't know exactly. So that is what made me feel worse. That they don't know, and they're just resigned. That just help us out. And
now we are actually means we are facing that it could have been done properly.
Exactly.
That's what we are seeing.
Tomorrow, if it was exactly so, right? They were just so happy that we relieved the pain. So that itself made us feel more terrible, that they don't even know what could have, they should have been suffering all this.
Yeah. So she doesn't know her condition. That's the thing.
Properly. So with this hospital that Dr. Nisha, we have a regular, pre-RT dental checkup with the oncologist. Yeah. We have it's a regular communication. Every case, we call and ask, and what to do, should we do or not do. So some things, I mean, this is some which can be avoided 100%. That is what my strong belief. So that is why I selected this case, that this is a good platform to interact with everyone. And
is very important.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Did you?
I was wondering what they were angry about and who they were angry with.
Sir, yeah.
About dying. How did they mention dying to you? And probably what does it mean to them? And what are their concerns about and around dying? I just thinking out loud. I don't know whether you have any input on that.
sir, we could not go into that much of this thing, but the dying part and all was, that she kept repeating in her language, that I know I'm going to die, I know I'm going to die. And the pain is there. And no, sir, they actually, I don't think they put so much thought about it into anything. As I said, they were uneducated and from the village they had come. So it wasn't, much of a intellectual exercise for them.
Okay. I guess we are also running out of time. Sunil, thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
And thank you. And that was a very, very excellent, clear, comprehensive presentation. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. So kind of you.
So, as we already knew the importance of communication from Biju's class, so here we are again seeing another, maybe we don't know what happened. Was there lack of proper communication between the teams? And as palliative care physicians or palliative care people,
Sorry, sir.
For coordinating the multiple teams involved in providing care to the patient.
Yes, sir.
So I think
Sunil, can you just repeat what you were saying? Because for some part, your voice was not heard. So I think everybody was a little confused.
So I was telling that as palliative care physician, we should take the primary responsibility to coordinate the care of the patient.
Yes, sir.
So there will be many specialties involved in the care of the patient. So maybe something which was told from one department may not be acceptable to another department. So we also have to negotiate between the departments. So all this require proper communication skills, and this patient story itself says us that good communication is needed for not only for patient care, but as I told you previously, it also requires for our day-to-day activities. So thank you, Biju, for pointing out the importance of communication and what are the ways through which we can communicate, what are the barriers, and how we can be a good communicator, etc. And thank you, Dr. Swati, for highlighting the importance of communication again in your patient story. So thank you, everybody, for an interactive session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.